All right. Well, welcome everybody to the weekly group nutrition call, where we're focusing on the 6-week nutrition challenge. And for those who are maybe watching this on YouTube, my name is Dennis Cook. So I want to open up with a little quote and then a monologue to really just answer the question of what is this challenge? So I want you to start by thinking about this. Eating is a practice, not a formula. Okay, so at this point, you might be asking yourself, what actually is the challenge? I know you're thinking that because several people have asked me this question, even though you've already signed up for it. So I appreciate that. So the actual challenge is to learn what I call intuitive eating. So it is a mindfulness practice, and you are literally learning a new language. Okay, so what is that language? There's a constant conversation between our bodies and the food that we eat. And at some point in time, and I could probably pinpoint it telling the historical story about when our food got manipulated so much, but at some point in time, our conscious selves actually became cut out of this conversation. And instead, we are mindless servants to cravings for processed foods. And so this has actually become like a parasitic relationship where processed foods have co-opted our hunger system, our signals to our brains, and it's driving us to eat more and more of these processed foods. But like all parasitic relationships, the host eventually dies. So the way back into the conversation, this should really be a 3-person conversation: the food, our internal signals, and our conscious decision making. The way back into that conversation is through eating real food. So this is an intuitive eating challenge where we learn how to eat real food. This is what our DNA is programmed to interact with. It's our default operating system. So whereas processed foods are more like a computer virus, they take over the system and we're no longer doing what we've been programmed to do. So having that framework, it explains why the weeks are set up the way they're set up. So why do we start with protein? Week 1's theme is protein. It's because protein is your best tool to reestablish footing in this conversation. Protein puts you back in the driver's seat. Protein deficiency is what is most likely driving your true hunger. We talked about that a little bit yesterday in the Facebook call, and I'll talk about that at the end. And when you answer true hunger with protein, it's the most likely nutrient to help you achieve satiation. So in intuitive eating, we're learning how to hear our hunger signals and also to hear our satiation signals. And these are literally hormones in our body that we will learn how to hear by the end of this. We can also approach protein from a position of abundance. So that's why I love it for week 1, because it's an empowering behavior, right? Most diets we think about restriction, but protein, I'm telling you, eat basically as much as possible, right? The upper limits for healthy protein intake is well beyond what the average person is doing. We had some folks get some recommendations yesterday for the protein. What I like people to aim for is 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Most people are breathtaken by that, taken aback. It's like, wow, how much protein? But that's a good thing, because that is our tool for answering hunger and achieving satiation, and we get to have essentially as much of it as we want. So it's very, very empowering. And then, so why in week 2 do we shift to added sugars? Because sugar is the most likely culprit the most likely disruptor of that signaling system. Sugar is the devil on your shoulder. It's added to so many foods, even foods that we think are healthy, but they're in a can, added sugar, in a box, added sugar. And it's driving cravings while also depleting you of energy and health. So it becomes a feedback loop where it's telling us to eat more of these things. And like I said earlier, ultimately, like any parasitic relationship, this ends in sickness and death. I'm not saying you guys are like anywhere near that, but this is a process that will eventually happen inevitably over time. And then week 3, we shift to vegetable oils. Why? It's for the same reason as sugar. If we can, so vegetable oils, seed oils, when I'm talking a little bit about the history, these really only occurred in the human diet 50 to maybe 100 years ago. It's essentially a new food group. And it's a food group that is in processed foods. So if we cut out added sugars, if we cut out seed oils, vegetable oils, we're only really left with real foods, the foods that we evolved on. Okay, so those seed oils, those vegetable oils, they're an experiment in the last 50 years of a 2 million-year-old tradition of human eating, of human cuisine. Okay, and if we look at that timeline of when seed oils, vegetable oils were introduced into the human diet, and then we look at the increases in lifestyle-related disease, obesity-related disease, it's a perfect correlation. So that's why we focus. So we are slowly, gradually learning how to eat real foods and learn our natural communication, our natural intuition with how to eat real foods. And so that's the point of the challenge, how to listen to our body through real whole foods. Now, one last point you might be asking then, what about measuring, or why even measure if this is an intuitive eating challenge? Why are we going to go into chronometer and build that perfect day? Because also, we know enough to know that there are parameters for healthy calories, healthy macronutrients in the human diet. And we know that if you're in certain parameters, we can optimize that. So we definitely want to at least take a look and get a ballpark of where you're at. We want to make sure you don't have any deficiencies and are at risk for illness or anything like that. And then when we set those targets, that's what they are. They're targets, but you don't have to get there overnight. Instead, you want to use this intuitive relationship with food to feel your way there, to find your way there. If you arrive at healthy calories, healthy macronutrient intake through trial and error, through experimentation, through an interactive process, rather than through blind followership, you will actually learn the skill of nutrition as opposed to just following a plan. If you just follow a plan, it may work, but at the end of the 6 weeks, when I'm gone, you no longer have your crutch. Instead, at the end, I want you to have full mindfulness, awareness of how your body's reacting to certain foods, which foods you basically are synergistic with, you synergize with, that you like. A healthy diet should be sustainable, and it should be enjoyable, and it should be easy. So your participation in this feeling out process is critical to your long-term success. All right, so that's my opener, and then I want to open up to you guys now and just hear what you think about that, and any questions you might have so far. Oh, and I'll unmute you. Looks like you can actually just go ahead and unmute yourself.
There we go.
Nice pitch.
Jump in. What do you guys have for me?
Okay, I'm a first dayer, so should I go back and listen to all the other ones?
Yeah, so I will. Yeah, you're a first 5-minuter. So
Yeah.
I will speed you up. In a minute here, I'll share screen and show you guys like the course syllabus that I'm using as a template. So what we talked about today, the most important tool to keep you engaged is going to be to download the True Coach app, Answers. So I'll get you off that. We'll be starting in week 1. And so your goal is to focus on protein. So here's how I put it yesterday. I'm going to go ahead and mute you guys again. Sorry. And so the deal with week 1, it's twofold. We're trying to hear our hunger signals. So the activity for that would be to, when you wake up in the morning, actually check in, before you eat, whatever that first thing you're going to eat, it should be preceded by actually feeling hunger in your stomach. Okay. That might not happen till 1 o'clock, might not happen till 5 o'clock, but we're going to wait for that true hunger signal. In that process of experimentation, you're probably going to have the urge to eat several times. What you do with that is we're just going to take a mindfulness moment and write down, where is that urge coming from? Where's that craving coming from? Is it habitual? Is it, emotional? Is it boredom? Is it social? Whatever it is. You don't have to do this every day for the rest of your life, but I want you to actually remember what true hunger feels like. And then we want to answer that call with protein. We want to prioritize protein. Now, that could mean different things for different people. It could mean if you want to be like super gung-ho, it means don't even eat any carbs or any fats. Protein's always going to come with some fats until you hit your protein goal. Or it could just mean think about building a meal around protein, right? And so we even have, some folks on here are doing plant-based, and it just means remembering to have a balanced meal that includes enough protein, even from a plant-based perspective. But the mindset shift in week 1 is thinking about protein first as your primary tool and how you're going to build what you're going to build your diet around. The protein is going to be the foundation. And so if you can start to look at food and nutrition through that lens, then that's the big victory for week 1. And for all the reasons I just said, it's going to put you into better tune with your hunger signals as far as actually feeling hungry and actually feeling satiated. And I will get into the science of why. I talk about that in the videos that I record in week 2 with sugar and how blood glucose and insulin, how that disrupts all the hunger signals, and similarly with processed foods. So we want to eat real protein. Now, you could do protein shakes and all that, but I want you to try and eat real foods, okay? So if you're plant-based, we talked about that yesterday. If you're not, if it's a snack, we could do hard-boiled eggs. If it's breakfast, eggs, bacon, whatever it is. Fish, incorporating fish into your diet is going to be really good for your health. Chicken is like the bodybuilding go-to, and I'm not afraid of red meat. I like red meat. So start to think and build your intuition and build your week around protein. That's week 1's goal. I'll say one more thing. So, I don't necessarily promote the paleo diet. I do like the paleo diet, but I also like the Mediterranean diet. I like ketotarian for the plant-based. I don't really care so much about the name, but I do like to use paleo logic. So what I mean is, there's debates about all diets, right? um, you know, in my graduate program for nutrition, we basically just learned like, hey, you need XYZ nutrients. And then it's like up to you to figure out how to get that into your system. I found that the paleo Mediterranean diet are really effective for getting those nutrients into your body. But the paleo logic supports the arguments. It's like the philosophical backing to why you would act a certain way. So if you were to, argue, excuse me, I'll take a sip. Well, what makes you so sure that protein is the most important macronutrient in the human diet? Well, we can look at the archaeological records, the cultural records, and know that we were hunter-gatherers. That's not disputed. Well, if you think about hunting, it comes at the cost of, life and limb. We were willing to risk our own safety, our own mortality, in order to get animal proteins. That trade-off was worth it for humans. Not every primate made that decision. There are still gorillas out there munching down their body's weight in bamboo and plants out in the jungle. We took a divergent path during our evolution, and it came with it was a big risk reward. It came with great reward. It's what allowed our brain to make the massive leap. Was two things. It was eating, animal protein. That includes fish too. If you guys are like, I don't, from sort of an ethical standpoint. And it also cooking, because cooking made food, it's basically pre-digestion. It's making food easier to digest and more bioavailable. So we were able to get more nutrients and more calories from less time eating. And this did a lot for us. It freed us up socially. Like if you think about a gorilla and the fact that they have to eat all day long, they don't really have time to develop culture and technology. So our efficiency with cooking animal foods allowed us to really develop into what we are now. But it definitely depended where you were. If you were coastal and tropical, it probably did look a little bit more like fish and fruit. But there's still cultural evidence for the risk reward. So like when I was living in Okinawa, that was still a very traditional culture, and you could just see walking around that it was predominantly women who were tending to the gardens. And Okinawa is really cool like that. It's like, it's a city, but everybody's got their own little plots. And so it's like these mini farms. And there was still lots of little old ladies, 80-year-old ladies out there who could squat, by the way, and sit in a squat all day. That's important from the movement perspective. And they were gardening, and then the men would be out fishing, but they would be like on the cliffs, right, with waves crashing on them, walking, when it was low tide, walking a mile out to the ocean. So there was still a lot of risk there in the way that they were fishing, but it was and continues to be worth it. And that cooperation, the hunting gathering, persists today in cultures in Africa and around the world. Now, I will say this, even for, ladies who are like, I want to be more plant-based, when they look at like the Hadza, for instance, they're a hunting gathering culture in Africa. The women actually they skew to more plant-based. So that macronutrient ratio shifts. Couple reasons there. The men go out on a hunt. When they catch something, they are away from camp. And so they usually will take first dibs and honestly probably eat like the more prized parts, like the liver and organs. and then they will kind of collect everything and bring it back to camp. And in the meantime, the women are foraging,